Hello, and welcome to Sustainable Outlook, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the transactions, technologies, and trends in the sustainable economy. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out with suggested topics or guests, or questions about how we can work together to create a sustainable economy.
Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Sustainable Outlook. I'm Elizabeth Crouse, partner at K&L Gates and co-lead of our global power practice. Today, you've got me and only me, but in my capacity as a tax lawyer who has spent my entire career working with developers and investors in the tax equity space. I'm recording this on August 16, 2022, the day that President Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. And let me tell you, this is a day for the record books. So we know that the IRA isn't the Build Back Better Act. But what is it, and who wins? At a high level, the IRA revolutionizes how the federal government incentivizes renewable electricity and fuels. Basically, what we've got here are some extensions of old rules, some new credits that look a lot like the old rules, and then we've got this whole new bucket of new rules that tie to greenhouse gas emissions. We've also got ways for tribes, local governments, electricity cooperatives, and tax-exempt organizations to participate in credit-incentivized projects. We've got credits for renewable fuels like hydrogen, renewable natural gas, and sustainable aviation fuel. And we've got this concept of bonus credits for projects that meet domestic content requirements and that are located on brownfields or in parts of the country that historically relied heavily on fossil fuels. We've also got a lot of new structure possibilities because of the direct pay and transferability provisions. And of course, many of you have probably heard about the wage and apprenticeship requirements that are needed in order to even get to the first step of maximizing credits. All of these things are in line with policy principles that we've seen from the federal government basically since President Biden came into office. And it's consistent with some of the goals around domestic production, domestic manufacturing, incentivizing the energy transition to ensure that we don't suffer the energy supply shocks that we've seen in parts of Europe and are anticipating this winter. So that's basically what the IRA is about. So who wins big, right? Solar and wind got extensions. First under the existing ITC and PTC rules, and later in a couple of years under these new rules that are tied to greenhouse gas emissions. But in solar and wind, the real winners are the owners of projects that have already begun construction or that can start construction before the 60th day after regulations for the new wage and apprenticeship rules are issued. Kind of complicated, just like everything about this bill. So when will that be? Probably soon. We don't know for sure. But the statute is fairly clear about what it wants to see in regulations, so we might get something fairly skinny, which means we might get it fairly soon. I'll be pleasantly surprised if this period before the regulations begin to apply lasts until the end of this year. Might be longer, might be shorter. We'll see. In solar and wind, there's also some winners with smaller projects, particularly things like community solar and rooftop solar. When those projects can be installed in conjunction with certain low-income communities, certain tribal areas, things along those lines. Again, broadly consistent with this administration's focus on environmental and energy justice. Hydrogen also is a big winner here. Hydrogen got a PTC, a production tax credit, and an ITC, an investment tax credit. These rules incentivize the production of hydrogen with a very low CI, or carbon intensity score. Specifically, with hydrogen, what you want to get below is 0.45 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. Now, there are some credits for hydrogen with a higher score, higher CI score that is, but they drop off a cliff really quickly. Now, there are some questions here, though. There's a lot of measurements that have to be done. For example, the statute specifies that you need to use the GREET, that's GREET model, published by Argonne National Labs in order to measure the carbon intensity. It's not particularly clear, though, about whether or not the GREET model can change. Normally, it changes every year. It also doesn't say whether or not we have to use the national standard. There are state-specific and organization-specific GREAT standards also. These are big questions that have to be answered in order to determine whether any project will qualify and at what rate. And we note that the measurement for the new tax credits is different than under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was used to create many different spending programs, including the Hydrogen Hubs program that the federal government is also sponsoring. I note also here that the credit allows the hydrogen producer to, quote unquote, use the hydrogen. This is new. It's unusual for the production tax credit type of things. And it opens up a huge field for electrolytic ammonia and e-methane because the GREAT model stops running when you have hydrogen for the new tax credit. It doesn't take into account the energy intensity or carbon intensity of the activities after you have hydrogen. Renewable natural gas is also a big winner under the IRA. There's an ITC, an investment tax credit for facilities that begin construction before 2025 and are placed in service after 2022. Yeah, you heard that right. You can begin construction basically whenever you want, subject to whatever guidance we get from IRS. But you have to not place it in service until after 2022. Now, there are some folks in the industry who say you can just stop and not place things in service this year. My experience with the guidance has been that might be a somewhat dangerous approach, but there's a lot of room, there's a lot of gray area and room for maneuvering. Now, to qualify for the new ITC, the facility must convert biomass into a gas of not less than 52% methane, or concentrate the gas into a gas that's not less than 52% methane. Either way, fairly clear standards. The ITC is good for facilities that produce biogas for any purpose, not just transportation. But the PTC is for only transportation fuel. Now, this PTC, this production tax credit, would kick in for fuel sold from 2025 through 2027. And this is one of the new rules that's tied to GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions. So while the ITC is not tied to a GREAT model or a CI score, the PTC is. The other weird thing here is that, as far as I can tell, the ITC and the PTC don't appear to cancel each other out. So in other words, it appears that a facility could qualify for the ITC and the PTC. Now, both of the tax credits for renewable hydrogen gas have very short time periods, okay? That doesn't mean that we're going to hit those sunset dates and the credits are going to poof, go away. What it means is that the lobbying effort has already started. Carbon capture is also a pretty big winner here in a somewhat less exciting way. There are more credits, which is obviously very exciting. And there are also new credits specifically for direct air capture. But beyond that, we saw a lot of the same changes that we saw in other parts of the credit structures. There aren't any particular bells and whistles for carbon capture, I should say. Another really big winner here is tribes, okay? Many tribes in the United States have entered or are seriously considering entering the renewable electricity and fuels markets, but they've been stymied by the way that the tax credits and depreciation deductions are set up. Now, with the new direct pay rules, basically what that means is a tax-exempt organization or government or tribe or electricity cooperative actually can say, okay, I don't qualify for tax credits because I'm not taxable. But why can't I just get a check from Treasury? Now the direct pay rules say, ooh, you can get a check from Treasury, indeed. With these rules, the tribes that can get debt financing can now build projects all by themselves and get a check from the government when the facility has been placed in service. That's great. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a perfect picture. But there are a lot of details to work out, and depreciation deductions are still problematic. But there's also a lot of promise in this new law for tribes seeking energy sovereignty, or maybe more importantly, opportunities in the energy markets. Now, those are the big winners. We did okay out of this. Now, there are a lot of smaller categories here. Geothermal and biomass both got extended for ITC and PTC, and that's biomass to electricity. Hydro got some new credits also, some expanded credits, but the hydro markets are fairly limited. There are some unusual new narrow categories in some of the tax credits for things like dynamic glass, microgrid controllers. There are also some credits for EVs, electric vehicles, and fuel cell vehicles, which often run on natural gas or hydrogen. Now, these rules are a little odd, and it's not entirely clear how the new credits will shake out. First, we do have new categories for commercial vehicles and used commercial vehicles, both laudable things, areas where we can definitely improve, and there's some progress to be made. We also have some healthy extensions of the consumer vehicle and alternative fuel infrastructure credits that already existed. That's great because it provides some certainty in the market and encourages people to actually invest into those kinds of projects, like building consumer vehicles that are run on electricity and building alternative fuel infrastructure credits, or to those of us who are non-technical, electric vehicle stations where you can get more electricity to put in your car on the highway. But the consumer credits have fairly low income thresholds, and they've got really serious critical minerals and domestic battery manufacturing requirements. And the infrastructure credit is only useful in low income and rural areas. Looking at the totality here, it seems that the new credits may not be more heavily utilized than the old credits, although I'd be happy to be wrong. But on the other hand, they do encourage manufacturers to move more aggressively into lower sticker prices. If that can happen, if we can resolve some of the supply chain pressures, we should be in good shape. Now, on that note, we also have some credits for manufacturers of a wide variety of kit that goes into renewable electricity generation, renewable fuels production, and electric vehicles, not to mention recycling, which is also a very interesting development. These credits fall into two camps. There's a new round of an old appropriations-based tax credit for qualified advanced manufacturing facilities. There will be $10 billion in credits that taxpayers can apply for to build or rehabilitate manufacturing and recycling facilities for a variety of equipment, all related to renewable energy and alternative fuel vehicles, as well as a few smaller categories. Now, based on participation in prior iterations of this credit, it's likely that this round will be oversubscribed long before the application period closes. So start talking to your government contracts people right now. There's also a new production tax credit for manufacturing, a long, long list of different components of renewable energy facilities and alternative fuel vehicles. Now, the credit rate varies by component, but it's generally a very interesting program. However, like the biogas credits, it lasts for only a few years, barely long enough for many kinds of manufacturing lines to be set up and operate for a couple of years at most. Again, an area where we expect to see significant lobbying activity in the next couple of years, in order to obtain an extension, of course. Now, there were a few losers, okay? We don't have a transmission credit. There's a weird small interconnection equipment credit. But generally speaking, we don't have a transmission credit, which a lot of people were hoping for in order to improve grid stability in the country. We also have a few other things that sort of fell out between the Build Back Better Act and what was just enacted today. I think the biggest loser here, maybe, is those people who were looking to develop renewable facilities on federal lands. See, there's this weird leasing provision, not tax related at all, that requires that the rate, frequency, and size of renewables development on federal lands and in federal waters be tied to fossil fuel development in those locations. This is a damaging blow to the processes already running in many federal agencies under, for example, the Memorandum of Understanding that was released last year. And it's not good news for tribes. However, perhaps the biggest loser in this respect is the offshore wind industry. How to fix it? Well, the simple answer, because of course, speculation is that Senator Manchin felt very deeply about this provision. You got to have more people and more funding for operations at agencies like the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, so that we can move these leasing processes faster, so that, okay, if we have to have oil and gas and coal, we can also have renewables development as well. Now, what's next? Regulations are coming, folks. We will probably see wage and apprenticeship regulations first, because they directly impact qualification of many projects for many of the credits. We're going to get more credits after that, more regulations. But they may be released somewhat piecemeal. We have a lot of content here, and that $80 million of funding the IRS got in this bill is only going to go so far, particularly since they're probably going to have to go out and hire some folks. Now, what that means is that we'll probably see bits and pieces for different programs. But the good news is that the IRS has been waiting for an opportunity to clean up the investment tax credit and production tax credit regulations, many of which date back 50 years. So we're hoping for fairly broad-based new regulations rather than a scalpel approach here. Personally, as a tax nerd, I'm pretty excited. And we will get IRS guidance also. For example, all beginning of construction guidance to date has been issued in notices, which are not subject to the same cumbersome process as regulations. Expect beginning of construction guidance soon, though we don't really expect massive departures from the guidance we've had for the last decade plus. Another thing you should start doing is rethinking your structures. We have a lot of new possibilities for financing renewable electricity and fuels, as well as many other things to do with manufacturing plants here. The things that motivate people haven't changed, but our tools to get things done have, and we have opportunities now to bring new, different people to the table. Thanks for joining me on this special episode of Sustainable Outlook. Hope I haven't put too many of you to sleep with all this tax talk. But in the meantime, please reach out to me at elizabeth.crouse@klgates.com for a copy of the summary we drafted of the tax provisions of the IRA, and to receive a copy of the updated one we're creating right now that includes the non-tax energy-related spending programs. We look forward to staying in touch, and please join us here for the next episode of Sustainable Outlook.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainable Outlook. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. We hope you will tune in next time to learn more about the outlook of the burgeoning sustainable economy.